Right, let's get started. So looks like a lot of attendees are joining. That's fantastic. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm just going to go over a couple of things briefly before we kick it off. So you're currently at the very first webinar event of the Bytes and Insights series that Women in Analytics just launched. Today we're going to have a fireside chat with Taniya and Joan. This whole topic is around voice and voice data and voice analytics. And we are in partnership with Women in Voice and super excited to kick this series off with this particular event. So just to give you an idea of what Bytes and Insights is, it's a free virtual series featuring panel discussions, fireside chats, technical webinars, and book chats with best-selling authors. We are going to host one of these every other Wednesday until August. So if you're interested, please keep tabs on up and coming events that we have. Again, these are in collaboration with other organizations. So we're really, really excited to do that. And then anybody can attend. This is open to anyone. A little bit about Women in Analytics. If you're new to this community, our whole mission is to increase the visibility of women making an impact in the analytics space. We are very, very close to launching our new membership platform on Monday. So if you're interested in seeing upcoming analytics events, a resource center, job boards, and a lot more interaction with the community, be sure to check that out and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to keep tabs on what we're up to. Joan, do you want to give a little bit of background on Women in Voice?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Women in Voice is very self-descriptive, Women in Voice, but it's an international empowerment organization about amplifying women and gender diversity in voice tech. We are less than 2 years old, but have 11 chapters in 8 countries and support people across the ecosystem. So if you're not already, our main handle is on Twitter, Women in Voice, and we just launched a new website, womeninvoice.org, where you can find a newsletter, join chapters, Slack, LinkedIn, Insta, whatever you want. It's all hubbed at that website.
Awesome. Thank you, Joan. And today's topic and agenda. So as I mentioned, this is a chat between Joan and Taniya. So they're going to do the fireside chat and discussion until 12:40. As you have questions and Q&A, feel free to submit those. We will have a section at the end of the webinar today to do Q&A from the audience. And we'll do some closing remarks and conclude for the day. So just some quick webinar tips. You can use the side-by-side mode if you want to see both the slides and the presenters, since we have video on. If you're having audio issues, feel free to chat us or email us at info@womeninanalytics.com and let us know. We'll try to help you out with that. Again, if you have a question, please ask. And we will be doing one poll question, so get ready for that. So just to introduce our speakers, our panelist, Taniya Mishra, is the Director of AI Research at Affectiva. She is also the lead speech scientist there and leads a team of researchers who train deep learning models to estimate emotional or cognitive states from vision and voice. She finds building AI systems that enable people to have natural, easy, and frustration-free experiences interacting with and through technology to be the most rewarding part of her job. Taniya is deeply passionate about increasing gender diversity in AI. Her advice to women starting their careers in AI and tech is to dream big, build skills, and raise your hand. Thanks, Taniya, for joining us today.
I am so excited to be here with all of you.
She will be in discussion with our moderator, Joan Palmiter Bajorek. She is the founder and CEO of Women in Voice, and also the head of conversational research and strategy at Versa, currently spearheading their conversational research and strategy for the world's largest voice digital agency. She is a leader in the voice tech field, and her research and thought leadership pieces have been published in multiple publications. Around the future of voice products, bias in AI, platform disruption, and multimodal, multilingual interfaces of the future. She holds a PhD from the University of Arizona in speech language technology and an MA in linguistics from the University of California, Davis. Thanks so much, Joan, for joining us, and incredible intros, by the way, and bios. It's very exciting to have both of you here with us. So before we kick it off, I am going to launch this poll. And we just have one question for everybody before we get started on the discussion.
Well, I love how we start with data. Isn't this like the best? We have a question about data.
So everybody can see this kind of live update as you fill in the poll. The question is, do you currently work with voice data? We have a couple of options to respond: all the time, sometimes, not at all, not really sure.
I got so excited that I tried to vote, and then I saw.
I know it says you're a panelist. You're too fancy. You don't get to. We get to see the responses, right? I hope you get to see that.
I didn't want to skew the data, you know.
Oh, I know. N of 2 would mess it all up. Oh.
Awesome. So it looks like most people have voted. So a majority at 55% said not at all. So a lot of people joining us today are brand new to the voice analytics concept and community as far as implementation or execution background. So looks like we have a decent amount of people who have as well. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. And with that, I will pass things off to both of you.
Awesome. Well, I am just overjoyed to have this partnering with Women in Analytics. We're just so excited, Women in Voice. And Tanya, I've been watching your work from afar. So it's so great that we, although can't meet in person right now, get to speak with you today. We are starting with, I mean, there's some people, it sounds like, who are very understanding of the voice field and voice tech and analytics. But I think because this webinar is open to everyone, starting with some basic definitions. What is voice technology and what is analytics at its core?
Okay. Yes, I'm a huge believer in starting at the beginning with as few assumptions as possible. Some of the best work is done by people who just say, you know what, we'll go back to first principles and start there. So let's start the definitions. So voice, that's our most common modality for communication, for expression, descriptions of our intents, our wants, our feelings, all of it. And voice technology, at the highest level, I see it as the technology that enables us to interact with and through technology like we are doing right now in an easy, natural, frustration-free manner. If I were to dig a little deeper into that, I would say that voice technology is a combination, a pipeline of IoT devices or gadgets with AI models, and then all of it beautifully encapsulated with a user interface that people can use in a really intuitive manner. Once again, to kind of enable that extremely high level goal of interacting with and through technology in an easy, natural, expressive, and most importantly, frustration-free manner, which I think is a awesome goal, and not one that we have entirely achieved. We've made huge strides towards it, right? I have been doing this for over 15 years, and just to even be here with all of you, with you, Joan, and with all of panelists, with our viewers who have joined in to hear. This is amazing. Like 15 years ago, the community of people who worked in voice, the community of women who worked in voice was so minuscule that I kept meeting exactly the same people at every conference, every event, that women in voice and women in analytics could bring together over 200 people with a call in 2 weeks. That's amazing. This is exciting. So
I've definitely heard that before. Are there even women in voice? Like, is that big enough of a field that you could have people? Like, I've literally gotten this feedback, and I'm like, well, you should join and find out, because we have hundreds across lots of things, thousands. Cool. Okay, so that's a little bit more about voice tech, and it's not just Alexa and Siri products, right? I think that's a misconception that this is the whole ecology of what voice is. Well, and so related to voice, what are analytics and how are we using analytics in the voice field?
Yeah, so, again, analytics, the way I see it is, using statistics and mathematical logic to look at, a large quantity of data and to identify patterns, to identify relationships between one aspect of the data and another aspect of the data, to predict likely outcomes, and ultimately to make data-driven decisions. So that's how I think of analytics. It's interesting how even the word analytics, how commonly we use it now, has really changed, I would say even in 10 years, right? Even 5 years, that it's so common, it's like almost a mainstream word that you can open up any sort of business publication and see that word. And then with respect to voice, the way, we analyze different aspects of voice in so many ways. So I'll just give some examples. One that is really common in my work is that we look at different features of voice and see what is the relationship between, let's say, your pitch, your loudness, your pace at which you speak, and the emotion that you might be experiencing at that time, right? So what is the relationship? So I could say, like, usually, not always, because these are statistics, when people get upset, the intensity, the amplitude of their voice really goes up because there is a strong correlation that we've found there. Another way that you can think about where analytics comes into play is that, let's say you are trying to build a speech recognition system in a new language for which not much information is known, and that's actually many of the languages of the world where there are not good speech recognition technologies, or it's really largely unexplored. So you might first start out by just looking at the distribution of the phonemes or the sounds that are in the language. What are the groups of sounds that tend to occur together? Again, that would be something that would come out when you analyze, the text or the phonetics or the acoustics of that particular language. So these would be some ways in which analytics could really help, start the process of building voice technologies.
Absolutely. And I think the more we have the data is growing, right? We collect this data, we're looking at this data, and I think you're talking about like the deep learning and machine learning, but like the analytics on top of that to understand it better.
Even how people are using it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So, like who's using the technologies that you are building? How are they using it? How often are they using it? When is it most useful? When are people most frustrated with it? Mm-hmm. There's analytics to study. We need to use data to understand all of these phenomena rather than just anecdotal evidence.
Absolutely, data-driven. Look at the data. I'm working on a project that the research is informing the design. And I was looking at what people are actually using this product for. And I found that 3 use cases are 52% of all usage, right? So, but to making sure, like, if this is what users are coming to us for, are we doing a beautiful job for that 52%? Not that the other use cases are unimportant, but really talking to the design team and saying, did you realize this? 3 use cases out of like the 27 we built. So I love research, I love data so much. Well, I think we talked about kind of what, but I'd love to talk more about why and kind of the importance of voice data, of analytics. I know both of us get so jazzed about these topics, but can you tell me more about why? Frustration-free is fantastic, right? And if some people think it's just about Alexa or Siri or Google Home tools, that's one thing. But why is voice technology, interfaces, changes in the ecosystem, why is that important to people?
Yeah, so I think, for many of us, right, who use these voice you say voice technology, and immediately the thing that pops in your mind is a voice assistant, because most of us use it on an everyday basis. And honestly, that has really put voice technology sort of on the map. It's expected to kind of, I think like the numbers are something like 7.5 billion digital voice assistants will be available in the world on active devices by 2021. That is more than the number of people that are supposed to be in the world by 2021. And that's a tenfold increase since 2016, right? I mean, it's amazing how much, how common digital assistants, voice digital assistants have become. But, the reason I would say, these are so popular in a sense is because, again, it leverages our most common communication modality, our voice. Second is any kind of device or application or system that has a voice interface allows almost anyone to interact with that technology. You could be, a 2-year-old that doesn't know how to type, that doesn't know how to write, but you've learned how to speak, and you might be able to, pick up some of those, useful key phrases to actually use that technology. All of us have probably watched those videos of the 18-month-old requesting Baby Shark, from one of the digital assistants. And it allows, the elderly, for whom many of these new technologies can have kind of a steep learning curve, that it could be really useful for them, but, it's just the process of learning it could be quite challenging, or perhaps for health reasons, we are, not able to type, or, because we are differently abled, the way our communication modalities, might be different than what is common, what is typical. So I think that for me personally, the most exciting use of voice technology is actually accessibility. And that is really what inspired me to get into this field. So in the early 2000s, when I was an undergrad, I had this amazing opportunity to be part of a NSF research project where the goal was to build a coding infrastructure that could enable visually impaired folks to learn how to code. And it was an incredibly hard problem back then, and it's an incredibly hard problem right now, because even though we use voice for so many things, coding is essentially a very visual activity. So, this required many of us, to become very creative in how do you give coding instructions using voice, especially in a framework when in the early 2000s, like there was a lot of like, you have to put a semicolon here and a closing brace here, and all of the extremely visual ordering of, code. And so how do you instruct people using, using voice to make, to help them learn how to code? And that's really what introduced me to voice synthesis. And I actually don't remember what was the particular library that I used for doing voice synthesis back then. But what was neat for me was that I immediately saw the power of voice technology in giving people access, right? Something that without that technology would be so much more challenging. And so I saw its power, but I also saw its limitation in that, voice synthesis back then was exactly what it is shown in movies, like it is robotic, it is completely, staccato, you cannot express your emotions, and it sounds really unnatural. And thinking that somebody is going to have to listen to this for hours on end, I was like, this can't be, and so when I was in grad school soon after, that really became the subject of study for me. I wanted to, look at, can we make synthesized voices sound more natural, more expressive, more emotional. And that was the subject of my thesis, and then, carried on to my job after my PhD work in making voice synthesis systems for AT&T Labs sound more natural and more expressive, specifically focused on young children. And this was kind of interesting because the goal there was, if you can build a storyteller system that can keep young children engaged, because they are tough customers, right? Like you lose them. If you're boring, you lose them right away. So my thinking there was, if you can build a voice synthesis system that can keep young children engaged because you're telling a story in a really engaging manner, or the system is, then that kind of a system can read a phone book, can give directions, because you're catering to adults, and it requires less expression.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say accessibility is inclusion are sort of, I would say these are amazing goals that can be achieved using voice technology.
And more we're seeing multimodal futures, right? Integrated approaches with voice, and I'm really excited about the future of gesture. You're talking about kids,
Yes.
And like how voice is accessible to some and less to others, and 2-year-olds designing for the 85-year-old. Excuse me, of course the dump truck comes right now. But you also mentioned kind of a robotic word system that we had back in the maybe 80s and 90s. And you also mentioned emotion, which is a very exciting topic. When they were reading your bio, vision and voice came up as both topics, which are very attractive in this field, especially thinking about multimodal inputs, multimodal outputs,
Yeah.
kind of thinking about the whole system. Do you want to share a little bit about your work or things related to sentiment analysis?
Yeah, sure. And I love that you brought up multimodality, because I earlier, in our conversation, I said that voice is our most common communication modality. However, it is in some of our communication, it's actually other modalities that we tend to use. So our faces are extremely expressive. And when it comes to emotions, we use our faces a lot. And it's honestly uneven use of modalities. So like if I asked you right now to act angry, you would most likely raise your voice. But if I asked you to act happy, you would use your face. So, as we are building up these technologies that are meant for accessibility, for inclusion, for, improved communication with and through all of our devices, we need to be we don't need to work in silos. We need to bring together all of these different modalities. Use your face when that's most appropriate, use your voice when it's most appropriate, use touch when that's most appropriate, use text when that's most appropriate, right? It's not an either or, it's and, right? When speaking of emotions, I think that this is the new frontier of voice technology. We have been, I have been working in voice technology for over 15 years at this point. And I would say in the last 10 years, sort of the, interest and acceptance of voice technologies has really been ramping up, starting about, I would say 2016, 2017, people have moved from chatbots, text-based chatbots, to really coming to accept, voice communication, with our digital assistants, with our cars, with all of our devices, even refrigerators. I heard that Samsung has already or is considering making smart refrigerators that tell you what is there and what is not there, right? In your, vocally tell you that. But like anything else, when we start becoming comfortable with a person, when we start becoming comfortable with the technology, we start expecting more from that. And I think that as we become more comfortable with all of the voice tech that is around us, we are no longer satisfied that it is like, these single or even two-turn transactional interactions. We want these things to be multi-turn. We want them to be conversational. We want them to be emotionally intelligent. We want it to be context aware. So, let's say you put some kind of a reminder on your phone that might be perfectly acceptable in a home setting, but then you happen to be in your office at that time. You don't want that reminder to come on in front of your coworkers, let's say. Maybe it's a medical appointment. You want it to be discreet. So I think that, we want our voice technologies to be, in a sense, ubiquitous, but ambient. Like, it's there when you need it, and when you don't need it, it sort of recedes. And emotions are a big part of what, give us a feeling of satisfaction when we converse with someone, when we feel that they don't just understand the words that we say, but they are also understanding the emotions that accompany it. And we're not very good at talking about emotions. Like, I'm not going to, sort of in the middle of our conversation, I'm showing you constantly that I'm actually really excited and, this is fun. But I'm not like, repeatedly saying to you that, oh, I'm so excited, I'm so happy. But I get that you get it, and you're reciprocating it back with your body language, with your face, or even the modulations in your voice. So the work that my team does is looking at, what are, how do people express their emotions in their voice or in their face, maybe even in their gestures. We haven't started looking at that. And then with that information, how does that inform, how does it inform how the system interacts with you? So let's say you are in the car and, you are having a really positive interaction with another person in your car, or maybe even if you're alone, you're sort of singing along, and the system basically senses that you are in a really positive mood. So when it has to give you directions, it might give it to you in a very happy, chipper voice, kind of in a friendly voice. But if it can tell that, either because you're sighing a lot or because of, other signals that you're having sort of a off day, a day in which you are certainly not in a very positive frame of mind, maybe the voice, the mode in which it talks to you, whether it is to give you directions or to, remind you of something, might be, I would say, more factual, maybe more somber and less chatty, because that's what an emotionally intelligent friend would do. Like, they would tailor their interaction with you based on the emotional signals that you are giving beyond just the words that you might be expressing.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the mirroring and accommodation of how we are listening to each other and reacting, or choosing to respond to each other. Oh, you brought up so many good topics. I just could go a million places. I think one of the big things that I think about, though, especially in these kind of systems that are responsive, this relates to data as well, but thinking about, or I've seen recently, there's something on LinkedIn where someone said, blah, blah, blah is soothing across like all cultures and people, like these universals, right? Oh. And they tagged me. Oof. I chose to respond, but like universals like that, to say all people find X soothing, right? I think these types of, when we extrapolate data sets too large, right? Especially when there's culturally imbued things or different linguistic features of how we communicate. But this relates also to, I think, what data sets look like and who is represented in data sets, which is a topic both of us, I think, are quite passionate about. My research was published in Harvard Business Review around this topic of saying, if our data set is 70% a certain population, will it extrapolate to other populations well? And the answer is usually absolutely not.
Yes.
But could you talk a little bit about data set curation, implications of what unintended biases can have? Do you want to give some examples about that kind of topic?
Sure. I mean, this is something that I think about all the time, because under the hood, most voice technologies that we use are learning machines. They are machine learning models, deep learning, or more traditional approaches that are simply learning from examples. You can think of it as like training a child, right? You give it a number of examples. Honestly, none of these systems are as smart as a human child, but that's sort of the idea. It's exemplar-based learning. And what's unfortunate with specifically voice data sets that historically most of the data comes from white or Chinese males. So consequently, if you're training a model, let's say from that kind of data, it is going to learn those cues, and whatever you build from it most likely will work really well on those populations and not as well on populations that are quite different from it. Like the closer you are to that population, it might work well, but like the more you diverge from what the system has primarily seen, it's going to be less and less confident about it and probably could be just flat out wrong. So it is still a problem that, many speech recognition systems actually disproportionately misunderstand women, people who are of ethnic minorities, people who speak with non-native accents. And it's because their data is not represented in the data set. And it's very hard to fit these things retroactively, right? It's good to address at any time, but, sort of a simple, not easy, but a simple way would be to address it from the beginning. So rather than retrofitting it, let's say you want to build, a new model, a new classifier to do a particular voice-related task. Maybe a good step would be to first look at who's building, who's building this thing. Who's collecting the data? I see Joan getting excited because she knows exactly where I'm going with this. It's like, let's get as many different people into those, initial conversations. Let's get more women. Let's get, people who speak with non-native accents. Let's get, engineers who are differently abled, who have different needs. And the reason is not that, the existing tech workforce building this, who are primarily, again, Asian or white men, are necessarily out to build, bias systems. It's just that our life, like data collection is as much art as it is science. Mm-hmm. So our life experiences, our perspectives, our concerns all inform that data collection. So if you get a diverse group of people, sort of co-creating this technology, you immediately now have brought people with many different kinds of lengths looking at what's in your data set. Like if I'm there and I don't see somebody who speaks with Indian English accent, who is female, or or anything else that defines me, I might be like, hey, this data set sort of has a hole missing. It has a hole, like it's missing data from people who are like me, or people who are like the people that I care about. So I think that is, I would say, that is a simple but not easy solution. And honestly, this is where conversations like we are having today, really become important. It is, we need these communities. We need to be ambitious. We need to constantly upskill ourselves. Like the days of when we used to, study for the first 25, 28 years of our life and then work for the remaining 40, I think those days are gone because technology is changing so fast. Just science is changing so fast that we need to get new skills. We need to constantly upskill ourselves. And for that, we need to ask for help. And who do we ask for help from? We ask for help from our community. Our, community comes from people who are like you in some way, or they do the same kinds of things, or people who just care about you. So these conversations. And last but not the least, and I'll say it because this is a conversation about, primarily with women, is we need to raise our hand. We need to say, I'm ambitious and I'm owning it and I'm going to do the work and I'm raising my hand and saying, give me that opportunity, which this is something that we as women tend to not do. We want to fly under the radar because we want our resumes to be more than 120% fit for the job description before we raise our hand.
And I think a lot of society pushes us down. I mean, you're talking to someone who sits in the front row and raises their hand too often. So I realize I'm not most people in that respect, but I do think the fact that you're like, be ambitious, like the fact that previously we've been socialized to think of ambition and potential as a negative thing, right? Like to express our interest and excitement and the desire, our drive somehow is negative. Honestly, even my mom's generation and the way she frames what career could look like and be. And this is, I think, related to women in voice. I'm going to be speaking at Voice Global about voice by everyone, for everyone. Because as you're speaking about, if you have someone who represents that minority or that group on the design and dev team, it says, excuse me, like this isn't going to work for my grandma, or this doesn't even work for me, or, it doesn't work for my Latina niece who's 8 years old. Like thinking about different populations and when you're on, and I don't know about you, but the design and dev teams are usually, 5 to 8 people, right? And so I think women in voice really thinking about upskilling, thinking about mentorship, thinking about, we run a large mentorship program in February for Valentine's Day. And it sounds like it's so popular this year. We're going to try to run it again in October, but really feeling belonging and feeling community, that people join the field, learn the things, and also stay in the field and are retained through the pipeline. That's actually one of our problems with our mentorship program is there's so few women at really senior tiers, and we're overtaxing them by sending them mentees. So we're working on that but it's an interesting, like literally by the numbers, we see these huge curves and how narrow it gets. It's super senior, extremely talented women who are at the top of their careers. So another reason to join the Women in Voice community when you feel alone or you're struggling to reach out to everyone. It is at the 40 mark. I realized that I didn't necessarily give you as much heads up, but do you want to conclude with anything before we transition to the next section?
I think I would just conclude by saying that in a sense, all of us can be mentors. You just mentor the person who is newer than you. And the second thing is every time you raise up your hand, every time you put yourself in the spotlight, it's not just for you, it's for all of the people who are looking up to you. I mean, my goal for, doing this or doing any kind of conversation that puts the spotlight on me, I'll be honest, it makes me nervous. But I do it because I want everyone who looks at me to say, if she can do it, so can I.
Absolutely. And I think that bi-directional mentorship, I learned so much from people around me, and especially my COO, her daughter is 4 years old. And I think about what the future we are creating for those next generations coming forward and the field I want them to be excited about and feel included in. So, oh gosh, give me all the feels.
I absolutely love this conversation. This is so incredible. And you've touched on so many important pieces too. I mean, we're talking about voice data and voice analytics, but at the same time, you can't have that conversation without the one about inclusion. And I think it's just coupled so nicely together. I do want to transition into giving participants an opportunity to ask some questions. We've got some that have come in already, so that's awesome. If you have not yet asked a question and you're interested, now is the time. So feel free to look at the Q&A piece. I will be reading off the questions to both Joan and Taniya to answer. So let's kick it off with this first one. It's a little bit longer, so give me 1 second to read through it. I work as an analyst in data quality. Voice data seems to tackle data quality in an interesting way because everyone speaks differently. So part of the technology is interpreting messy data. Are there specific strategies to ensure data quality of voice data? What can users of other types of data learn from voice data users about how to use messy data or make messy data more trustable?
Ooh, such a good one. Do you want to take that one, Taniya?
Sure. So I think that is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. Voice data is messy because we all speak and we all think we are experts in voice because we speak, right? But in some ways, the richness of voice data comes from its messiness. And the way I have usually chosen to handle it is to kind of look at, during the analysis phase, use different lens for trying to at least create some order in the data. So you might want to look at the data in terms of, demographics. You might choose to look at voice data in terms of, using the features as different dimensions by which you sort of, break up the data into subgroups and then delve into it. I think it depends on the task that you are after, but I would often say, you sort of have to take an iterative approach where you are using a zooming in sort of a technique. You're first making coarse cuts of the data and then really diving into it and looking at the distribution within those subgroups and trying to see, now, are there, just because you've clustered them doesn't mean that certain clusters shouldn't come together after you have sort of deep dived into them.
Absolutely. And I think when I clean data sets, for my PhD, I collected thousands of data snippets. And I think knowing, culling and cultivating which features you really want to look at, but also being like, ooh, I'd really like to go back to, user 93. Can we scale that back? I know they had a fan on in the background, but I think there's something important. I'd like to go back. It's shocking, or keep all your data, keep it organized, keep it all. But I'm shocked at people who are like, oh yeah, we threw that out. We didn't think that was necessary. It's like, no,
don't throw anything away. Be a pack rat.
Exactly. Bring it all back.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I'm going to move on to another question because we have a decent amount rolling in. So the next one is, what ideas do you have for collecting more representative data as SOA approaches get more and more data hungry? I've had experience with collecting audio data all over the world to capture dialects and accents, and even at a smaller scale, that was very expensive and logistically difficult.
Well, I think it's expensive and logistically difficult, but getting easier, I would say. I partnered with a startup to build an API into different web pages and to Qualtrics to collect my data. I will say the quality of hardware has really played problematically how our devices, the 180 radial microphones and things, I've been noticing are getting better and better, but to be very thoughtful with what hardware you're using to collect the data in general. It's such a good one. Taniya, you want to take on?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Because it's easier to collect data from people who are already using voice assistants, right? But then what happens is our data sets end up having overrepresentation of people who already have that access. So whenever we're thinking of data collection, I think we should think about and especially data collection with a goal for increasing diversity. We actually have to not just go with the easiest approach, but almost the corner cases. So for example, here in the US, I think 42 million people do not have reliable, broadband connections. How do you reach those people? I mean, right now, while we are all home and those of us that have kids who are being taught virtually, there are kids who are not being able to get that information because their communities may not have broadband. So similarly, when we're doing data collection, I think kind of like Joan said earlier, that just because some data is messy or data is difficult to collect, we shouldn't not do it. I would even hazard to say that that's the data we should go after first, because that's the data that is already missing in existing data sets.
Absolutely. And when I think about overrepresentation of data, in days when we flew on airplanes or went on buses, when I walk onto planes, I unfortunately sit in some of the back rows. So I look at the people in the front of the plane who are the first adopters. We have quite a bit of data about those people. But as you walk further on the plane, right, you get different types of people usually. And the last people join the plane who are 3 kids in tow with them, and minorities usually.
That's me. 3 kids in tow.
Exactly, and that's the type of data that's less represented, right? Those last to join that party, but to think about that whole data set and who is represented to what degree is certainly ways I visualize what data sets, in R, it's a little different to visualize some of those things. But I think getting excited about it, I know especially my colleague at Google works on this specifically and thinking about low resource or currently low resource languages, because some places in West Africa, I'm mind boggled about this, but they write something down, they take a picture of it, they send it to whoever they're sending the message to, that person reads it, then does another post-it, right, and back and forth, because currently the tech doesn't support them whatsoever in their script and for their voice assistant potential. So kind of that multimodal, literally using images because the tech is so poor for their language.
Yeah.
So I think I realize we're talking about voice data, but I really multimodal and thinking about the voice hungry and the data hungry. I mean, data is more valuable than oil these days more than ever. And so really just thinking about how we collect data, cultivate data, getting excited about data, going to our, when we were back in, PhD land, getting people excited about collecting that data and how to analyze it and thinking about innovative ways to approach it as well.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I just want to ask, if are there any barriers to sharing data, privacy barriers or technical barriers to try to help lower these costs?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I think that this is there. I mean, Reagan, I think you raised a really, really important question. Joan, you earlier mentioned that people have just thrown away data. It's not yours to throw away. It's not yours to share without permission. It is not, I think we need to build trust in the people who are actually giving you data to analyze, who are allowing you to collect data, which means that we should be very careful we should follow all of the guidelines needed to keep their data safe, because we've already seen how data can be used really maliciously. So, having high standards of security of the data that you collect is going to give people, the faith that their data will be used in a way that helps them, that it is being kept safe, and that it is not going to be shared without their permission. But then another aspect of permission is people should have the ability to withdraw their data from your collection if they want to. Giving consent to, letting you collect data does not mean that they can't take away consent. That's kind of definitional of consent. So I think building that trust, that partnership, really, people you collect data from, they're not just your subjects, they're your partners. they will help you build better systems. It is important that we make our processes transparent, make our processes secure, and be really respectful of people's privacy and their rights.
Yeah, and I think especially with my team launching our new website, being GDPR compliant, thinking about California protections, but especially I think about the unfortunate topic of domestic violence and surveillance tools. I've heard some shockingly horrifying stories about how voice data or data in general is a surveillance tool, but also I think about back to who is on the design and dev teams that creates those protections when things go wrong, right? When things are when things are being used maliciously, and back to who's on those design and dev teams that's fighting for protections of how our data is being used. We want that to be a diverse population that advocates for, I'm concerned if it's used this way, this could be extremely detrimental, especially to, single parents, especially women. Yeah. So data privacy is a huge problem in general, but especially for sensitive voice data, as we see the richness of what voice data can be and is. I'm excited to be on the advocacy team inside companies related to that topic specifically. And I'm happy to say that I don't know about you, Tanya, and in the capacities of your contracts, but I consult for different companies and go into different technical road mapping to say, I'm concerned about this, or, this might not support 40% of your users, depending on how you build, especially with masks these days. Can you get the audio data through a mask to a high fidelity? Yeah. So I think being an advocate internally.
I think every team actually needs those people inside the team, not just outside. It's not just adversarial, but it's the responsibility of every good research team, development team within a company to not just, build something, but to ask, should we build it? Should we build it this way? Who is it going to affect positively? And who are the people that it might unintentionally, negatively affect? Because historically, what we've seen is that when we build technologies without taking these things into consideration, the marginalized populations get disproportionately hurt compared to the privileged populations. So it's really important in every team, whether to have, advocates like Joan who are coming in to give that advice, or just to have that be the makeup of the team internally to raise these questions around the ethical development of the technology that they are after.
It's such an important topic, and we've seen such an influx of committees that are being formed of different departments within large organizations to discuss ethics generally about data and analytics. So I'm really glad that we were able to touch on that point. Let's close this up with one more question. If you had to recommend some resources, reading materials, articles that you subscribe to, books, things like that, what would you recommend to the audience to learn more about voice data?
That is, so I would say, I'll say something that are some of my favorite things to, get information on. Is I actually often refer back to conference proceedings of, ICASP or Interspeech or ACI, ACI's more general, or, NeurIPS. All of these, what's great about these conference proceedings is that you are actually seeing some of the most cutting edge research that is being done, which will probably be productized in 5 years, 10 years, maybe 15 years. Like, I remember when voice assistants became, really came onto the scene and started getting a lot of traction in the general population, and people were like, oh my gosh, they just built it. And I'm like, they didn't just build it. Like, people have literally been building the building blocks of this for 2-3 decades to, because good technology, good science is actually, built piece by piece by people, many people standing on the shoulders of people who've come before them. And if you really want to learn about, what is sort of the most most cutting edge, what is, about to burst onto the scene, I find reading conference proceedings or journal articles really useful. Joan, how about you?
Yeah, well, I love, and of course, very academic, scientific based. I personally, if it were my first day in voice tech and I was excited about it, it's not specifically voice data, but to think about the whole ecosystem. Kathy Pearl's book, O'Reilly, about voice, or about conversational design, and really thinking about what it's like to be the designer instead of the end user, I think is a really interesting interplay. So that's one, actually, we're doing it for book club at Women in Voice. And of course, I would have to say, Women in Voice as an ecosystem to ask different questions. Our Slack regularly blows up with people being like, I'm interested in automotive. I really would love to look at this thing. Can anyone provide me resources or who to talk to in the automotive sphere of that vertical? So I think relying on each other for different resources, and social media blows up with all these cool articles of people around the world sharing different topics. I think what's really cool is that so much is open source these days. I really have the sense that kind of the gatekeeping of material in companies is disappearing more and more as people want to get validation for the work. I mean, sometimes in healthcare, for example, it's 7 to 10 year cycles of how long, you're talking about internally, how much they're working behind the scenes before we even see MVP products. So if I can't say it again, please join the Women in Voice community if that's of interest to you and fits your interests. But I think reading, absorbing material, asking questions, putting your hand up, and being like, I'm interested in, I'm currently looking at phoneme performance is one of my research topics in design, trying to be accessible across multiple languages and dialects. Phoneme performance really affects, especially for weak words or different product design things. But there's not a lot of, or if you know about research related to phoneme performance across languages, hit me up. I'm looking for that research right now. Yes, Reagan, last notes. I know we're at the end here.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining, for prepping for this. This was an excellent discussion. Very, very excited to have both of you join us. And thank you again, Joan, for partnering with us on this event. As I mentioned, Joan mentioned a bunch of ways to get involved with Women in Voice. And if you are interested, highly recommend that you join that community. And just to real quick close this out, our next, if you're looking for the next webinar or virtual event that we're doing, we'll have a career chat with Catherine from Upstart and Jen, who is a part of the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science Columbus chapter. So if you're interested in joining us in 2 weeks on the 27th, we will send more information on that in a follow-up email, along with a link to this recording if you would like to watch it again. With that, thank you so much to everybody who joined, stuck with us for the entire hour, especially during lunch if you're on the East Coast. And feel free to get in touch with Women in Analytics and Women in Voice for further conversations.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a really great use of my lunch hour. I am so glad that we chatted.
Me too. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.